Hello, I'm Jim Zub. I'm a professional comic book writer, and I've been using these videos as a way to answer questions and try and demystify some of the comic writing process. So I've got a couple questions here from people on the Comic School Discord forum, and I wanted to answer them and also use that to illuminate what I think is probably one of the most important aspects of comic book storytelling and a really unique part of the process. So let's dive right into this here. This question comes from Chris Brooks, and it asks, are there certain layouts or layout elements that lend themselves better to certain kinds of stories or storytelling elements? That's a pretty broad question. So in terms of layouts, I can talk about certain layouts being effective or certain page configurations being quite valuable, but obviously each artist is going to bring their own qualities to the page. I may dictate some of that in terms of the script or talk about how many panels could be on a page, but every single time I want to collaborate with an artist, I want them to bring their strengths to the project. So the more they're able to play to the way that they want to tell the story and strengthen their layouts based on that, it's going to be a stronger end result. That being said, I do think that there are certain very effective tools that you can use when it comes to storytelling, when it comes to comic book storytelling in particular. Comics have a really, they are their own medium. And a lot of times people compare comics to movies, they compare comics to television or animation or all these other kinds of things. But in my mind, and when I'm in my working process, yes, you may think about some of those things or discuss them in the process, but comics need to kind of be segmented into their own working process as well, because they're not storyboards. We are not seeing these images in isolation. We are seeing them as part of a full unit of a page, right? We're also not, moving through time the way that video does. So it's, TV and movies are not necessarily an appropriate absolute comparison. Let me give you an example. So this particular shot that you're seeing on screen right now is from Dungeons and Dragons Infernal Tides. The artist is Max Dunbar, and the colorist is Sebastian Chan. And it's one of my favorite miniseries I've worked on. Max is such a stellar storyteller, and we jive really well together, particularly when it comes to the fantasy stuff. In this particular sequence, it is sort of this lock and load moment. These knights, these paladins are gearing up for an epic war, this epic battle that's going to take place as they charge literally into hell. And our ability to control the pacing of these panels, in this case, a series of extreme close-ups. So we're getting the atmosphere of this equipment as the characters are gearing up. And then with each one in the narrative, we're building up this kind of excitement before we move to this epic 2-page spread. And there's really very little kind of movie equivalent to this. You could have a series of close, tight cuts and then cut to a pulled back shot, and ostensibly that's what we're doing, but we're doing more than that here, because it's also the size of the panels. The fact that these 5 panels are all on one page makes those moments, you're not just looking at them in isolation, you're looking at them in comparison to each other, and the amount of page real estate that they take up change the way that you read through the page, and it changes the speed that you read through the page. So when we do finally unveil this 2-page spread, this unbelievably epic war with hundreds and hundreds of soldiers that crazy Max Dunbar has drawn here in this sequence, we're not just cutting to a wide shot, we're cutting to a totally different aspect ratio. We're cutting to a totally different size of panel and page. And that openness generates a very different feeling. It generates something kind of unique to comic book storytelling. There's also a really amazing aspect of comics that I think seasoned writers take for granted and new writers don't realize the importance of. So I really want to drive it home here. And that is the power of the page turn. The fact that in the vast majority of cases, you have, books. These are physical printed objects. And even if it's digital, you still have a page turn quality where we're moving from page to page or image to image. There are exceptions to this rule with like an infinite scroll and things like that. But the vast majority of comics we're talking about still involve pages, still involve the page turn. And our ability to generate a surprise on that page turn is not something you should take lightly. It's part of our toolbox and something that we, can use very, very effectively. So here's another example of it. This one is from Infernal Tides issue number 3. And so two of our characters, Crydal and Shandy, are investigating, there's this town under siege, and they get pulled aside when they hear a voice calling out for help. And then Shandy gets pulled away at the end of this page, but we don't know by what until we turn the page. And it's very specific in terms of the numbering. This is page 17 of the original story, which means that, on a typical printed comic, obviously page 1 is that front facing page. So all of the odd numbered pages are revealed as the reader turns the page. And so putting those kinds of discoveries, or putting a scene transition, or putting any kind of reveal on that even numbered page is going to have a potency to it. It's going to generate just a subtle bit of a reveal. So here we go. Now we see, oh my gosh, there's these 4, chain devils. And this is a really bad situation. Crydal is outnumbered. He's going to be up against these devils, and they have a lot more power than he does. So, and they've got, his dear friend Shandy captured right in front of him. If we had the same panel at the bottom of the previous page, it wouldn't have the same power to it, because the reader's eyes would subconsciously drift down and know what they were going to see. They would know what the villain was before they'd even finished reading the page. Our ability to generate interest and surprise with the page turn is part of the comics medium. And it's something that, if you're smart, you lean into and use to your advantage. So when I'm pacing out an issue, I'm not just thinking about individual panels or even individual pages. I'm thinking about scenes and scene transitions between these pages. And if there is a way for me to build up excitement to be revealed on an even page number when the page is turned, then I will jockey and jostle the pacing of the issue as much as possible to make that happen. Does it happen every single time? No, there's definitely times where I have to put just the amount of space that I need to reveal and story that needs to be done. The odd numbered page, the facing page, is going to be the reveal. But wherever possible, I try and use those units. I try and think in those pairs, not only what is on this page, but what is facing this page and what will be revealed when the page turns. So here's another example from Wayward. This is a creator-owned series I did at Image Comics. Stephen Cummings and I did 30 issues. Had so much fun working on this series. And this reveal is right in the first issue. So our main character, Rory Lane, she's exploring the streets of Tokyo at night, and she gets accosted by these jerks, and then they hear something off panel. They hear this strange kind of roaring noise. What is it? What's coming at them? We don't know until the page turn, because this is on page 11. So this is an odd numbered page that's on the facing, page. And then on the page turn, we see, bam, this new character, Ayane, and she's dropping down from above and about to attack these guys. And not only are we changing the aspect ratio with this layout, but in terms of where we've placed that reveal, it's got the maximum amount of impact. We've got these smaller panels building up to the big reveal, and then we have it on a page turn. So it's even more potent. Now I'll continue this scene because we end up using the same trick 2 pages later. So in one more page, Ayane ends up dropping down on these hooligans, and she starts tearing into them. And you think, wait a minute, these guys are jerks, but she's literally tearing them apart. She's literally tearing off part of their faces. Like, why is she doing this? Who's good and who's bad? And then all of a sudden we reveal these guys are not what they appear to be either. And their full monstrous form is revealed again on the page turn. So there are these kind of demonic kappa. They're like these turtle monsters from Japanese mythology that we have amped up and made even more nasty looking than normal here. And their full kind of form is not shown until that page turn. So once again, it's just another way for us to generate that interest and keep that momentum going across these pairs of pages. Now, again, you don't want to wrench your story so badly. If you taffy pull too much and just to get that reveal out of it, it might not necessarily have the same effect. But if it's a natural rhythm that you're playing through these page pairs and you're moving through these scenes in an even odd kind of way, and then on those evens you have the reveals, I think it's a really powerful way to tell a comic book story, and effective. And it's something, it's a time-honored tradition for a reason. And something you should definitely look toward. And that's something you can do in your writing, regardless of who the artist is going to be or how they're going to lay out the page. You choose when those kind of big payoff moments happen. And if you have them hit on the even page number in your typical printed comic, it's just going to be that much more effective. All right. So moving right along here, Chris has another question. And he says, what are good ways to arrange a layout when the page is, and needs to be, rather dialogue heavy? Now, in any particular issue, you're going to have talky scenes, you're going to have action scenes, and how much or how little you put on the page, really gives a guideline to the artist in terms of, if they're good at their job, how much space they need to leave. And that is something that takes practice. When you have a really text heavy scene, that is a problem solving issue for that artist to put together. And each one has their own kind of ways of working. So right here is a page of script from Conan the Barbarian, number 22. And there are 6 panels here and 23 individual text callouts, which is a lot. Some older comics might have more text than this, but in terms of modern comics, this is kind of the upper, I wouldn't say the upper limit, but it's definitely in the heavier kind of portion in terms of how much you might see on a page. There's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of back and forth, there's a lot of information being covered on the page. Corey Smith, the artist on this series, is fantastic at picking his battles in terms of where you leave space for these things. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, it can be extremely valuable to rough in. And I guess I don't insist on it, but as much as possible, I highly push the artists that I work with to include the text callouts on their roughs, because it just makes the storytelling clearer, and it allows both the editor, the writer, the colorist, the letterer, everyone involved to understand how this page is going to come together. So this is Corey's rough layout for that same page. You've got all 22 of those callouts here on the page. Even though in the final lettering it will be laid out slightly differently, just the very fact that Corey has incorporated them into the layout means that there will be enough room for all this text to work. And most of these layouts basically carry straight through to the final page, although there are some subtle changes. In some cases, Corey has pulled the camera back a little bit more on a panel, or in the case of these 2 central figures, he flips them because it works better for the way the dialogue interplays on the page. Just any of the things that Corey can do to strengthen that final result. And here you see this really text heavy, very dense page, and yet all the core components in terms of storytelling, where the characters are, how they're interacting with each other, the way they're reacting to each other is so clear and carries through. Now, thankfully, not every single page I write, very few pages, honestly, are this text heavy, but we cover a lot of really important plot points and character interactions that will pay off later. And then I can open things up and let Corey really go buck on the action scenes with a lot more visuals, and just, I get out of the way and let him do what he does best. So here's another example. This one is from, again, Dungeons and Dragons Infernal Tides, issue 2. So in this case, we've got 17 different text callouts in the script, and Max has thumbnailed out the composition for the page in a really great way. It's very clear. We've got these wonderful establishing shots, and then there's a lot of density of text in the bottom. And the way he's chosen to solve that problem is to have the figures essentially take up 50%, in some cases even less than 50% of a particular panel. So there's tons of room over their heads for the letterer to make use of. Now, there is some background detail and some architecture that he's put into it, But what you can see here on the finish page, and this is finished without lettering, is how much open space there is. And when you see a page like this, it may seem very empty. It may seem very, like vacuous in some ways. And yet we know that this is not a complete page. This is not a finished printed unit. This is just all setting up and staging for the letterer to finish off the page with a beautiful, series of balloons that are going to help, put all that dialogue into place. And he's got some background detail, but he's purposefully keeping it minimal in the areas where that text is going to go. Here's the finished page with all the dialogue in place. And not every panel is stuffed to the brim. Obviously, this big establishing shot in the top is still very open, but all these other areas have been filled in nicely. And there's a real nice, clear hierarchy in terms of the word balloons, what order you're supposed to read them in, what order the characters are standing in. And none of it feels like it's getting pushed out. It's all just being reinforced with really smart use of the page real estate. This also has a page turn quality to it, because the very next page, these characters are going inside Candlekeep. So this huge kind of cathedral, castle, library, monastery, it's like all these amazing things in one place. They go inside. So rather than having them go inside on this page, I can have them on the page turn enter, into the library. And what you see here is, this is again Max's layout, tons and tons of beautiful perspective. One of the things that Max does I really like is he has his actual perspective grids right here on the roughs, so he knows what all the angles are going to be and does all that kind of development work. He calls out all the text, and here is the finished colored page without dialogue included. And there's obviously smaller, denser areas, but then again, above the characters, 50%, sometimes 60, 70% of a panel is left open for a lot of chatter. On these particular pages, there's tons of dialogue. And so Max very smartly plays to that strength. These areas of open floor would seem really odd if this was how it was going to be printed. But in the end, when we've got all this crazy amount of dialogue, it fills in quite densely. And it is an intense kind of read with lots of back and forth and banter. Now you look at those two pages and you think, man, Jim, you're not being paid by the word here. You got to calm down. These are pretty unusual in terms of the sheer amount of dialogue that's going. This is pretty early in the issue, setting up a bunch of important information. And again, once the action kicks into gear later, I get out of the way. Let's do the big visuals and have that work on its own. So this page, for example, is from Glitterbomb, the Fame game. It's a creator-owned series that I did with Jabril Morissette Fan, and he is an amazing artist. And we did this very kind of Hollywood horror story with a realistic, real kind of slant to it. And in this case, the characters are at a press conference and just getting bombarded with questions. And the way we showed that was actually, Jabril did a wonderful job of keeping the camera tight on the characters, and purposefully we jam-packed the lettering right to the edges of those characters in a way that you wouldn't normally do. But here, because of the particular story we're trying to tell, it's that these people are getting hammered with questions, that they are feeling this pressure of, you see all these sound effects, these fwash, 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 which are like the flashes of the cameras going off. And then you have those behind the dialogue and the questions layered over top of each other. And when you see that all together, it gives you the feeling, this claustrophobic feeling of the press scrum as the reporters are relentlessly hammering them with questions. You see the page here without that lettering, and it feels, a lot quieter. It feels a lot simpler and less intense. But in the final version, because we've got that jam-packed, those dialogue balloons right to the edge, it creates a very different feeling. Here's the next page. And what you can see here is, this question period going off back and forth, between the reporters and our main character. And she is talking here about sort of a bunch of really hard things. We don't want to see the reporters. We don't want to have that interactivity. All the cameras are focused on her. all the cameras are focused on her reactions. And by keeping that camera really tight and jamming those questions, really like overlapping her with them, again, we have that claustrophobic feeling that, this scene is awkward for her, that it's difficult for her, that she is under this spotlight and not used to this kind of pressure. And so in this case, the actual lettering being closer and tighter and overlapping more than you would normally adds something to the storytelling. It's not just about going panel to panel and telling the story, but it's how can we use the composition, how can we use the drawings, how can we use the lettering to enhance the emotional quality of what we're trying to do. That's determined by where those page turns are, how many panels are on a page, how much text is on a page, where that text is, and how it's being shown. All of these things are tools in our toolkit that we can use as comic creators to enhance and strengthen, the story that we're trying to tell. And so when you analyze this stuff and you get better at using these tools, your stories will be more effectively told, that you're not just going through the process and using the exact same shots the exact same way every single time, but really thinking about what effect do I want this page to have? What should the reader be feeling? And how can I enhance that through the artwork, through the lettering, through the coloring, all the tools, working in unison to make great comic pages. Okay. So I hope this has been a really clear example and that you can see the potential that can come from really great comic book storytelling. It's not just about, page 1, page 2, page 3, but where this stuff is and how we use it that makes the best comics possible. When you find great collaborators, and I'm so thankful that I've been able to work with people like Max, like Corey, like Jabril, because they are real experts at what they do. And they don't just look at the script as a cold mechanical process and, okay, get all the information there, but it's how can we enhance it? How can we strengthen it? And when you get great collaborators and you're all moving in the same direction and adding to the story that's already there and the dialogue that's already there, that final printed version is such a joy to behold. It's such a pleasure to work on because you get to see it grow and expand and become even more effective at every stage. If you found any of this stuff useful, I'm glad I was able to bring that information to you. And as I said before, demystify some of the process. You can find a whole lot more over on my website, jimzub.com. I have over 40 free articles and tutorials, questions and answers, and all kinds of stuff about working in the comic book industry, writing format, how to pitch, some of the economics of creator-owned comics, and a whole lot more. If you want to go even deeper, then you can go to my Patreon page, and on there you can subscribe for less than the price of a coffee. You can dig through over 250 of my scripts, outlines, and also ask me questions that I might answer on a future video just like this. Otherwise, I hope you're doing well, and I hope the summer is going well for you, and go forth and make some comics.